of paper. So it doesn't really matter what's technically legal or illegal. What matters is what people can get away with doing. Like, Obama murdered American citizens with no charges. 2 of them, at least. That is illegal. That is very clearly illegal.
You're talking about drone strikes.
Yes, it was
suspected.
Well,
terrorists.
it was Anwar al-Awlaki and his son. Now, with the son, who was like 14 or 15, they came back and killed him a few weeks after they killed the father. Now, I believe they claim he was not the target of the drone strike, like that he was just collateral damage. Still, I would argue should be illegal. But most people don't buy that because it's just like seems very obvious that they were trying to take him out. But the Anwar al-Awlaki guy certainly had been radicalized and I think had sworn allegiance to Al-Qaeda. But he's still an American citizen. And the rules are, if you're an American citizen, are you have to be charged with a crime, and then you get a lawyer in a suit and a judge in a robe and 12 people who are like pooled randomly, and they decide if you're guilty of a crime. And by the way, he was in Yemen at the time, but they can charge you and have a trial, and if you don't show up to it, they still, you know what I mean, like convict you of it. Right. But there's a whole process. You don't just have the president drop a sky robot on you because he says you're guilty of these crimes. And you know, it's funny when people they'll still talk about Obama be scandal-free administration. You know, what was his biggest scandal? He wore a tan suit or something, and you're like, how about them murdering American citizens without charges? That was a pretty big scandal, in my opinion.
And what about the people that got killed by drones that were totally innocent, which is somewhere in the range of 90%?
It was over 90%. There was one report that came out about that I think said somewhere in the neighborhood of like 95% of the people killed in drones were collateral damage, were not the targets of the drones. These, you know, people like to think of these things as they call them precision strikes, but like surgical. They're not surgical strikes. They're bombs that blow shit up. You know what I mean? And yeah, a lot of innocent people die. And then out of those, it's even higher than that because what they're counting as the target of the strikes just means you were put on a list, which does not always mean that you were actually a terrorist, because what happens is a lot of times they're working with these groups on the ground. They kind of bribe them to rat out who's a terrorist, but a lot of times those groups are just giving you like their enemy. Right. You know what I mean? Like someone they want to get killed, or they're just coming up with names because they want you to keep bribing them. The whole thing was such a clusterfuck, man. And some of it is still going on to this day, although now we've decided to flirt with an even much more dangerous nuclear war. But yeah, even the drone bombings weren't the worst of what Obama did. You know, the worst of what he did was overthrowing Muammar Gaddafi in Libya, funding the anti-Assad rebels and starting a civil war in Syria, funding the Saudis and giving them the green light and refueling their fighter jets so they could genocide the people of Yemen for 8 freaking years. That was the worst of it. And just goddamn tragedy.
Yeah, but he talks so well.
He gave a hell of a speech.
Great president.
He really gave a hell of a speech.
Great statesman.
It's people forget how good he was. The job aged him a lot too. He wasn't as good at the end as he was at the beginning. But if you go listen to his it's nonsense. It's mostly just like gooey nothingness. But if you listen to his speech at the 2008 Democratic National Convention, his official acceptance speech, it's just like, it's a masterclass on public speaking. He would just say these things, even when they were like meaningless. But he would, like, I remember, I was trying to think if I can remember. He has this thing where he's like, I love this country, and so do you, and so does John McCain. The men and women who have fought and died in our armed forces have been Democrats and Republicans and independents, but they did not die defending a red America or a blue America. They died defending the United States of America. It's like, but the way he would deliver it is so like, it really just tugs at your like insides and makes you like, God damn. And then after a little while, you walk away and you're like, wait, but what did he say?
Right.
You're like, oh, that was nothing. I mean, it was nothing. It wasn't like, you know.
Well, that's a
he did say some good things when he ran, though. Yeah. He did. I mean, he ran on some really good policies, like ending the wars and closing Guantanamo Bay and repealing the Patriot Act and restoring the rule of law and, you know, ending torture and all. Yeah. The shame is he did none of it. And I think that's like, I go back and forth. You could pick like any president really of my lifetime. You'd be like, who ruined the 21st century for America? You could certainly make an argument for George W. Bush and Dick Cheney, but there's something about Obama. I think I put probably more blame than anyone else on him, because he was supposed to be the response. And like, that's the way this system of government is supposed to work, or so they say, is like, well, we have these democratic processes, so you can, if you're upset with these guys, you can kick the bums out and vote for these guys. And obviously we all know it's like, then they narrow it down to 2 teams, and those 2 teams happen to have the same policy when it comes to, the military industrial complex or the banking industrial complex or the pharmaceutical industrial complex. They're all on the same side. So that's how the uniparty works. Like, no matter who you vote in, they're all supposed to be. But the country was so furious with George W. Bush and Dick Cheney, who handed him 2 disastrous failed wars and the worst financial crisis in 100 years. And they were so furious with them that they voted the most opposite thing they could. This junior senator, constitutional lawyer, brilliant, articulate, everything that was the opposite of George W. Bush. And he was supposed to be the answer. And then he got in and just continued the Bush administration. It might as well have been the 3rd and 4th term of George W. Bush. And that is where the country spins out, to me. That's where you end up with Trump.
I bet if you were friends with Obama, if you really were friends with him, if you could have a couple of drinks, maybe spark up a joint and talk to that guy, if he really trusted you and knew you were never going to tell anybody, I bet he could tell you some shit.
Yeah, I bet you're right.